Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Well, today we're going to find out about King George and Queen Mary's son, John. He was the fifth son and the youngest child, and things seemed normal at first, but then it was discovered that things weren't right with him. And so let us find out how the family dealt with the problems their son was born with, and how it affected the family and how they felt about him. When Prince John celebrated his fourth birthday in July 1909, he had begun to exhibit signs of not being in good health. He was painfully slow. This is according to the book Matriarch by Anne Edwards. He started to have epileptic issues, and there were doubts that he would live to be an adult. So John spent most of his time with his nanny, Lala Bill, at York Cottage. His brother George would treat him almost like he was his parent. John didn't see his parents very much. They were busy doing royal duties. His grandmother, Alexandra, considered John her favorite. She spent long hours amusing him whenever she was at Sandringham. John didn't go to Broadstairs School. George and Mary had hoped that his seizures would lessen with time, but that didn't happen. According to EnglishMonarchs.co.uk, in 1912, Prince George, he was the nearest in age to Prince John, began attending St. Peter's Court Preparatory School at Broadstairs. The following year, it was reported that Prince John would not attend Broadstairs and that his parents had not decided whether to send him to school. And his seizures got worse by 1916, and he was sent to live at Wood Farm with his faithful nanny, Lala Bill, providing care. Though he maintained an interest in the world around him and was capable of coherent thought and expression, he failed to make educational progress, and the last of his tutors was dismissed and his formal education ended. So let's find out about the nanny, Lala. Prince John would find a love and companion in Lala, who was named Charlotte Jane Lala Bill. She was an English nanny to the children of the Duke and Duchess of York, later King George V and Queen Mary. And she was the under-nurse there, but Lala didn't like what she saw the head nurse doing to the other royal children. So it seemed like Prince Edward was the favorite of the head nurse, and she resented it when other children started to enter the nursery. And she had been neglecting the second son, Bertie, so Lala let it be known what was happening, and the head nurse was let go, and Lala became head nurse. As the children grew up, she became especially close to the youngest child, John, who had epilepsy and learning difficulties. Charlotte Lala Bill looked after him at Wood Farm, where he had lived more than 2 years away from the rest of the royal family on Sandringham Estate. And she was with him when he died after a particularly severe fit of epilepsy on January 18th, and it was she who telephoned his mother, Queen Mary, who was at the main house at Sandringham. For weeks, the king and queen received a public outpouring of sympathy, receiving hundreds of telegrams and letters of condolences. Yet in later years, they were accused of being callous. And the nanny attended his burial at Sandringham Church, where he was interred next to his uncle Prince Alexander John of Wales, the infant son of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, John's grandparents. According to wikiwand.com, Lala Bill remained devoted to the memory of the young prince right up to her death on December the 13th, 1964, at the age of 89. She died in a hospital in Maidenhead, Berkshire, England. On one visit to her house, John's brother, the Duke of Windsor, noticed that the object he saw when he walked into Bill's house was a large photo of Johnny as a toddler on her fireplace mantel. Companionship with the kids and Lala. So Prince John seemed to have a life that his siblings probably would have longed for, away from the court and the duty that they had to endure. John had a devoted nanny, and he had friends with the neighborhood children. Local kids were recruited by Queen Mary to be his friends so that he wouldn't be lonely, and he would enjoy normal childhood games, nature walks, and bike rides around the huge Sandringham estate with the prince. And the memories are of a happy, friendly, confident boy surrounded by love, passionate about his private garden, and not at all lonely or abandoned. There was a young girl named Winifred Thomas from Halifax who had been sent to live with her aunt and uncle on the Sandringham estate and hoped that it would improve her asthma. The pair became close, taking walks together and working in Queen Alexandra's garden. Queen Mary gave Winifred some of his books after he passed away, which she had inscribed in the memory of our dear little prince. Lala Bill affectionately kept a portrait of Prince John on display in her home, together with a letter from him that read, Nanny, I love you. So how his parents showed love for him. When John was first born, George took paternal leave. He divided his time between sitting in the garden close at hand whilst his newly healthy baby slept in the shade cast by nearby trees and doting on his wife. So Winston Churchill noted that the king wasn't some taskmaster to his children. He also said, neither do children who live in fear of their father engage in full-blown food fights in front of him. Winston Churchill also said there's nothing to suggest he remained anything but a fully fledged member of the royal family. In fact, when the other children were left behind to continue their lessons, their majesties would take him with them as they alternated residences. He was given elaborate birthday parties. When Johnny turned 4, there was a party that had dogs and monkeys. When Johnny lived at Windsor or Buckingham Palace, and it seemed like a prison for him, it was said that he was like a chatterbox, and then Queen Mary decided to pick out Wood Farm for him to live. She picked out the decorations and made sure the bedroom had a window view of the steam engines that he loved, and his brothers got involved too. And then when she dropped him off on January 1917 and wrote, it's very sad to see this great strong boy with the mind of a child of 6, and it makes one quite unhappy. According to an article by madamguillotine.co.uk, John remained with his family until the age of 12, when after his seizures had become worse, his parents were advised that he might not well attain adulthood, so they set up a separate household for him at Wood Farm, a comfortable house on the Sandringham estate. Also, 12 was the age that his brothers were sent away to attend Naval College, so it's likely that being clear that Prince John wouldn't be able to cope with such rigors, their parents opted instead to give him a separate establishment, while at the same time keeping him close. It probably made Johnny feel more like he was just like his brothers were, because they went away when they were young at that age too. And according to dailymail.co.uk, John became a popular figure in the nearby villages, working in his garden and delivering apples in his little cart. He wrote regularly to his relatives and joined them at family celebrations. And on January 18, 1919, he got up early and went on a brisk walk with his sister, Princess Mary, and Johnny died that afternoon. It was only then, in the official announcement of his death, that the palace told the public of the condition that had affected him since infancy. Let's see the times that he remained close to the family. Well, George was the brother closest in age to John, and they did a lot of things together. And Queen Alexandra would have a car pick Johnny up, and he would go to her place, and they would play together. And letters from Johnny to his father, George V, were discovered in the possession of a descendant of one of the prince's companions, and there were sweet letters that were sent to King George from Johnny that said, Dear Papa, I'm sending you a box of snowdrops for you which I have picked. These 2 daisies I have picked out of my garden, and my dear Papa, I am sending you in a box some lilies out of the Wolverton woods. The garden is very nice here. I'm very busy here. Best love from your devoted son, Johnny. His parents loved him. According to the dailymail.co.uk, there is evidence that George and Mary, though emotionally distant, didn't just cast him away from the family. There was a scrapbook about Johnny, and it records the arrival of his first tooth, his first word, ta-ta, and when he began to crawl and take his first steps. Alexander Churchill, author of The Eye of the Storm, George V and the Great War, says that by the standards of their class and the era, the royal parents doted on all 6 children. When Johnny died at 13, Queen Mary was very upset. She wrote a letter. Lala Bill telephoned from Wood Farm, Wolverton, that our poor darling Johnny had died suddenly after one of his attacks. The news gave me a great shock, though for a little boy's restless soul, death came as a great release. It brought the news to George and we motored down to Wood Farm. Found poor Lala very resigned but heartbroken. Little Johnny looked very peaceful lying there. For him it was a great release on his malady, which was becoming worse as he grew older, and he was thus been spared much suffering. I cannot say how grateful we feel to God for having taken him in such a peaceful way. He just slept quietly, no pain, no struggle, just peace for the poor little troubled spirit, which had been a great anxiety for us for many years, ever since he was 4, and that was an excerpt from Queen Mary's own diary. And George V wrote in his diary after the funeral, "Poor little Johnny was laid in the churchyard next to Brother John." Prince John's funeral at Sandringham Church was well attended by most of his family, including his parents, grandmother, sister, and 2 younger brothers. Amongst the flowers that covered the grave, there was a floral cross from his parents with a card saying, "For our darling little Johnny, from his sorrowing parents," and one from his grandmother saying, "In remembrance of my darling little Johnny, Granny's precious grandson, whose memory shall never fade, may he rest in peace forever with the Lord, though we shall miss him sorely here on earth, from poor old Granny Alexandra." Afterwards, Queen Mary wrote in her diary, "Tuesday, January 21st, 1919, Canon Dalton and Dr. Brownhill conducted the service, which was awfully sad and touching. Many of our own people and the villagers were present. We thanked all Johnny's servants who had been so good and faithful to him." Queen Mary also wrote, "Miss the dear child very much indeed." And then Queen Mary, in her anger toward Edward. So right before Johnny died, Queen Mary had written a letter to her son Bertie, and she said to him, "There is no doubt that Johnny has gotten worse of late, which is very sad." She said, "Don't say anything to Papa about it. I thought you would like to know." In this case, it seemed that George and Edward didn't want to know about the bad news. Mary at least had Bertie to confide in. When Johnny did die, Mary wrote to Bertie, "It was a merciful release to the poor little soul of unrest, but simply heartrending, and she felt rather stunned. She and George were awfully upset," she wrote. "This was their first real sorrow." George tried to keep his emotions in check, and he wrote, "It is of course very sad, but no one could have wished him to have gone on living, but he was quite happy, poor boy." George, a few days later, went out to hunt, and Mary was happy he did, because she said it was good for him and it gets him out. So now we come to the letter that Edward wrote to his mother. It upset her so much that she destroyed it, but there was a letter that survived that he wrote to his mistress, Frida Dudley Ward, that might have been what Edward had said to his mother. He described Johnny's death as the greatest relief imaginable and what we've always secretly prayed for. Johnny had become more of an animal than anything else. Needless to say, Mary didn't answer his letter, and when Edward realized how upset she was, he apologized. He wrote that he felt cold-hearted and unsympathetic swine for writing all that he did. Bertie, the other son, showed great sympathy over Johnny's death. He wrote, "I can see from your letter that it's upset you very much, and I don't wonder either," he told his mother. "When I received the telegram from Papa, it upset me too, especially as I had not seen him since this time last year." The British Epileptic Association stated there was nothing unusual in what the King and the Queen did. At that time, people with epilepsy were put apart from the rest of the community. They were often put in epilepsy colonies or mental institutions. It was thought to be a form of mental illness. So Mary's private letters to her son reveal how upset she was by Johnny's death, and she wrote, "It was an awfully trying moment when the coffin was lowered and we were terribly upset." Her code of upset meant tearful, according to the book, George V, Never a Dull Moment. Mary and George tried to do what was best for their son. They knew that having too many people around him by living in the palace could cause him to have seizures. They felt he would be more relaxed at York Cottage and then at Wood Farm when things got worse. He had the companionship of his nanny, Lala, and they loved each other dearly. He had the companionship of the kids in his neighborhood and his family. Queen Alexandra, she loved to play with him. George, his brother, was close to him, and Mary and George loved him too, and his brothers loved him, but since he was the youngest and they were away to begin their careers, they didn't have a chance to see him very often. It is great that Johnny got to spend time with his sister Mary on the day he died, and they had gone for a walk together, and he passed away later in that day. So he wasn't just sent away, never to be seen again. Mary and George weren't unloving. They did what others in their social status did. They left the duties of caring for the kids to the nannies, and they did spend time when they weren't off doing their royal duties. It must have been a terrible thing to have to balance family and duty to country. Well, I didn't know anything about George and Mary until recently, and I found out about Johnny then. And it's been so interesting to learn more about this fascinating family, and I'm glad Johnny got to spend time with people who loved him before his life was cut so short. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. And I wish everybody a great day today. Tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you.